problem that you have, yes, you, the one looking at this penguin face, the problem that you have with Minecraft building is not any lack of natural skill or determination. It is solely the mindset that building cannot be taught. You know, this artistic talent cannot be taught. I'm here to show you that is absolutely not the case. Building has these constituent components, and if you break those down, study them, and then apply them to your building, regardless of your starting position, you can emerge as a building master. So in this first series, we will be focusing on concepts that are important to everybody, the very basic fundamentals. Let's get right into it. Let's talk color palette. So when you're starting any Minecraft build, don't just kind of throw stuff together. You're going to want to put down something like this. Something that's, 5 blocks by 2 blocks, and it displays a color palette. Now there's a few concepts going on here, but the one I want to focus on right now is just a number of blocks. There's 3 different colors, right? And you can imagine if I were to scale this up, let's see if I can do this smoothly. If I were to scale this up and just make a house out of these 3 blocks, yeah, it would work, because basically there's some color theory going on here, but if I were to only use these 3 blocks, it would look pretty bland, right? My first recommendation is to, 1, make a color palette before you build something like this. Every single time, just throw something together like that, look at it and be like, does this look good? Does this look bad? And the second part of that is, if you're using 3 blocks, increase that to 5. If you're using 5 blocks, increase that to 7. I'm not saying go from 3 to 7. I'm not saying go from 5 to 9. In general, the more blocks you use, the better it's going to look. However, the more blocks you use, the trickier these other concepts become to integrate well. Essentially, there's more variables affecting each other. So just keep it simple. But if you're at 3, go to 5. If you're at 5, go to 7. You can imagine these two, I don't know what they're called. I don't know, swatches? These little mini things I make before I build a house. They're the same, like, palette, essentially. It's spruce wood and blue, right? And blue glass paint. But this one undoubtedly looks better. And it's simply because I'm using more blocks, right? This one has 3 blocks, this one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 blocks, right? The more complex color palette absolutely makes this more appealing to the eye. Now the next question there is, how do you choose which blocks? And that's a really good question. And that's honestly, it's like the question. So let's get into a little bit of color theory. I'm going to put some color wheels up on the screen here. Basically, there's 2 concepts that we're going to be using from this image. Basically, there's analogous and there's complementary colors. Complementary colors are probably what you know as contrasting colors. They're colors that are on the opposite side of the color wheel, and complementary colors are colors that are right next to each other. These colors are very close to each other on the color wheel. They are analogous. You can see it right here. And because of that, it looks decent. Because there's color theory going on, just like how there was with that one. And it only has a 3 block palette, so there's kind of a limit on how good it could look, but the good news here is that these colors go together because they're right next to each other on the color wheel. And something that's going on here is I have the darkest block on bottom. That's just a good rule of thumb. Now the next thing is complementary. These 2 blocks, you wouldn't think that lapis lazuli and orange sand or red sand would go together in a build. And I'm not saying it looks great, but it definitely doesn't look wrong. And that's because there's color theory going on here, right? It's because there's contrast, and there's some relationship between these 2 colors that you can identify in color theory. That's why it looks good. But my favorite one, and I'll circle it here, is something called split complementary, where you have a few colors that are analogous, right? And then you have one color that's on the opposite side of the color wheel. It just adds a lot. It gets both of these kind of working together in one. And I use this all the time. It is by far my favorite utilization of color theory when I'm deciding on a block palette for my builds. Now, as you know, in Minecraft there's more than colors. There's also texture, you know, how textured is the block. This one is more textured than that one. And there's also something called value, which is the darkness of the block, and we can absolutely get into that. I have another, you know, color palette laid out over here, or I'll say a block palette, because it's encompassing more than color. I have another block palette laid out over here, and I have something very intentional going on, and I do this in almost every single build. One is, look at the textures, right? I have one block that's very textured. I have one block that's, you know, it's right in the middle. And then the rest of them are very plain, right? I think that this, you know, on the 6 block color palette, which I use all the time, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. On the 6 block color palette, choosing one block that's textured and one block that's medium, and then the rest plain, that is a good balance. Because essentially if you make this all really textured, it's going to be too busy. Your eye's not going to want to know what, your eye is not going to know what to focus on, and if you make them all plain, it's just going to look boring. There's not going to be enough for your eye to focus on. It's not going to catch any amount of attention for any duration of time. So you need a little bit of a balance in your texture. Now something else that this is doing is it's also displaying what I was talking about over there called value. Darkness, right, on the grayscale. So you can imagine this is the lightest block in the block palette, and this is the darkest one, or this is the darkest one. And, you know, it's absolutely a concept that you should utilize. You know, be intentional, make sure there's a little bit of a fade going on with your analogous colors in your split complementary color scheme. And another thing to note with this is that I always put the darker blocks on the bottom of the structure, because it's just something about it that makes it seem more solid. You know, something weird with human brains that makes darker colors seem more solid and stronger. So, you know, it just looks right to have the darker colors on bottom here. And you know, you have a little bit of a, and this is a cool thing that's going on here. Not only is there a value fade, right, it goes from dark to light, there's also a texture fade. So it's going from highly textured to medium texture to low texture. And those two effects really combine together and make this fun to look at. It makes it look right in your head. Now let's get into the most important concept, which is called depth. So, look at this. This is a, I'd say it's a 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we'll call it 6. We'll call it 6. Yeah, this is a 6 block color palette, which is my go-to. And it's using the split complementary color scheme, right? And it has the darkest colors on bottom, so it's using all of the things that I say it should, but there's something else going on here. There's a reason that this looks better than this, even though they embody the same principles that we've spoken about so far. This one has depth to it. It's the most important one. If you take nothing else away from this series, know that you should add depth to your builds. So this has something, what I'd like to call 2 blocks of depth. There's this wall, which is the actual functional wall, and then there's these 2 decorative layers, which adds 2 blocks of depth to it. And that just, it adds so much to your build. I wish I could tell you why. I can't. All I know is that it does. So a couple really easy things to do here is, one, when you have like a window face, right, when you have like a wall with a window in it, you can just add a little column in between, right? Let's just say you have like a 3 block gap between your windows here. This lapis lazuli is the window. You can just add a column right here in between the windows to make it look good, and that'll just do that in all your builds. And that'll allow you an opportunity to put depth in these, you know, these wooden or stone columns that you add to the exterior of your facade. Is a really good go-to. Another thing that, you know, I'm sure you've seen in plenty of Minecraft builds on YouTube is using stairs as decoration, just to add a little bit more detail to the build. And the third thing I'd like to point out is that I'm actually using fences as like half blocks, right? So it's only 2 layers of depth, but look, there's actually like, there's this layer, and there's that layer, and there's that layer, and there's that layer, and there's that layer, and then there's that layer, right? I'm using fences and glass panes to add more depth to the build. And this is why glass panes are better than glass blocks. One, because it takes fewer resources to create, and two, because it adds depth innately. So fences and glass panes, always use those. Because even though this is only 2 blocks of depth, essentially there's like 6 different layers there. It creates the illusion of more depth, which is, it's what you want. Another thing to note, you can use 1 block of depth. I could get rid of these and this would still look pretty good. Sure. When you're using 2 blocks, your build starts to become very busy to the eye. So I'd just recommend, when you're using 2 blocks of depth, that's why I recommend only having 1 textured block. Only one highly textured block. And in this one, that's going to be the spruce. And then this polished deep slate is going to be the medium texture. Then everything else is relatively low. So this thing is kind of an embodiment of everything we've talked about so far. And as you can see, when you slap all 6 of these concepts together, you get something that looks pretty good. One more thing I want to talk about, and this, these are all just things you use to pick colors and build out your facade. But you need to consider shape. So essentially, these are like scales. These aren't... Building squares is boring. You don't want to build squares. When you're considering the shape for the foundation of your house, one, you should be building foundations and outlines. Just do something that's not a square. Like, look at this. Look at this. Do you see that? I just put 2 squares and then I put them together. This is a lot more interesting than that. I wouldn't recommend doing any one shape. My recommendation to get, at least a semi-interesting form, is to take 2 geometrical shapes and then slap them together. So look at this. I'm gonna make a circle. Bam, 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 bam. And then I'm gonna make a square. And it's gonna look good because I'm following my principle of use 2 geometrical shapes. Look at that. Amazing. So great. It's beautiful. I know it's really hard to tell at this scale, but that is a good rule of thumb. Stop making your houses square. Make them more interesting. Make their form more interesting. I'd say shape, but it's 3D, so it's form instead of shape. One thing to consider, because it is 3D, it's not only the layout or the horizontal design, it's also the vertical design, right? Having this entire house at 1 height, and again, this is just like a scale model. It's not as big as it should be. Having your entire house at 1 height isn't nearly as fun as having one section of your house that's taller than the other, or varying the height with some ratio in mind, like 3 to 2. This section is exactly yeah, this one is 3 to 2, right? Some simple ratio in mind with the height, and it looks better than it did when it was flat. So don't make it out of squares. Sorry, don't just build a square. Make a more interesting shape. And then when you have that shape as a foundation, when you're making it 3-dimensional and building it into a form, make sure that you vary the height a little bit, because that will also make it more interesting. So, just kind of imagine what would happen if you used these 6 principles with color and block palette to build out a house that had that form to it. That would look awesome. That would look amazing. Let's do that. Let's go do that right now. First things first. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Always build in odd numbers. And then we're gonna add this bad boy. Bam, 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 bam. Then we're gonna add something like this. Bam, bam. A little bit of something like that. Okie dokie. Add a little bit of depth to it. Bam, 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 bam. And then bring it around town. Do the same thing on the other side. So one thing to know when you're applying your facade into your form is that you're going to have to be a little bit clever with geometry here. So because there's 2 block depth, I can't just swing this around and build out the wall at this, right? Essentially, if there was 1 block of depth, I could have this as the final corner and just move it that way, this length, but I can't. Because I have 2 blocks of depth going on, you know, I'm doing this. So I actually have to make a little hollow corner here, or maybe fill it in all the way, and then add onto both sides of it, and then put 1 block out. And then that leaves a little weird negative space here that's too big, or empty space right here, so I put a few things in there, and that solved the problem, right? So it's, you know, just get a little bit clever with how you transition from your flat facade to your form. Because you're going to have to solve all those, because you're going to have to solve little problems like that all the time when you're building. Oh, one other thing that I'm doing, just to make the color scheme visible from the indoors, is to make these go 2 blocks through. One thing to note is that there is no depth on the interior right now. And here, just like so. Bam, bam. Right? Not like so. Never mind, I'm an idiot. I don't know what's going on in my head. Bam, bam. 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 Alright, here we are. Mostly complete. I have my depth established, my form is established, and the depth is established. Now I just gotta add in the rest of the block palette. And I'm just repeating a pattern. It's a really good, really easy way to make sure that your principles... It's a really good way to make a build look good, is you focus on the 5x5 square, make that 5x5 square look good, and then repeat it. And then the whole build will look good. Let's go nab these fences, because I'm far too lazy to go into my inventory. Note I have the spruce fences on bottom and the oak fences on top, because you should always have the darker colors on bottom. I don't know what to do here. We'll leave it at that. And is that it? I think that's it. Now it's just to put the roof on. Oh, always have your roof overhang, because that's how they do in real life. That's how you should do in Minecraft. Okay. And in this case, because I'm working with a depth of 2 blocks instead of 1, I'm actually going to have my roof overhang 2 blocks instead of 1. I don't really know what I'm doing right now. I'm just slanging. You know, I don't want the roof to be completely plain, so I'm trying to add in this depth slash detailing slash changing color, make it look better. And I'm not sure it's gonna pan out the way I want it to, but I'm giving it a shot. It's certainly unique, I'll give it that. Well, I don't hate it. And this is a good note to self with roofs. It's a good, again, just kind of like, oh, that's what it was, that's what it's missing. Yeah, because the form isn't interesting. It needs to have varying levels of height. That's why this looks a little bit off. Hold on. Tear it down. Remember, we're mimicking that structure. So let's follow this one all the way through. So one thing that's going on here is that I didn't like the shape, so, you know, I'm redoing it. Two, just because I'm redoing the shape to something that doesn't quite align with the original, I got something weird going on here, right? Because now it's not going to line up. Can increase the height. Make it line up. Again, just little problems to solve, because you're going to make modifications as you try to make it 3D. Neat. I really didn't put too much effort into this, like not really any at all whatsoever. And a second thing that I'm going to show you right here is how to do floors. Yeah, this floor is really monotonous, right? It all blends together. So one cool thing you can do with floors is just do a checkerboard design. So I'll show you one that you can. Oh, perfect. So you can go with the checkerboard design. And that'll serve you well. And here, let's just do this real quick, just to prove it to you. That'll go fine in any build, the checkerboard floor. But my favorite one is actually the value fade, where you go from dark to light. So let's go find some stone, and something like that. Awesome. And then I use that for a lot of my floors. Just really super simple. And if I'm really sweating, you know, I'll try harder, make patterns, fractals. But if I'm making a starter house, and this would be like a starter house for me, I'll just do that. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. You should know how to make something like this now. I'd say the most important takeaway is probably depth and color theory. In the next episode, we're gonna go over stuff like this. These are just the fundamentals. These are the very basics. In the next episode, we're gonna go over some more advanced concepts, like integrating it into Minecraft world generation to make your builds look better. We're also gonna go into a little bit of custom landscaping, and in the third one, we'll go into some really like game-changing concepts that'll up you to Hermitcraft level and beyond. Trust me, that third episode's gonna bang. But for now, you should be able to do this. Oh, and make sure you hit that subscribe button if you like this content. I'm gonna, you know, put out more Minecraft stuff here in the future. Or the best thing you can do to help this channel is to like the video, because that helps me expose my content to people that aren't already subscribed. And lastly, I have merch. It's like the YouTube banner. The banner I have on my channel, it's like that artwork is put onto clothes. Or at least elements of it. Not the whole thing, just pieces of it are put onto clothes. I think it looks pretty good. And I don't know, if you want it, you can have it. And that's pretty much it, guys. Catch you in the next episode. Okay, bye!